the Simple Fun Overhaul, or SFO, is the definitive overhaul mod for the Total War Warhammer series. Seems only fitting that the first video talking about it should be all about arguably the definitive faction of the games, the Empire. But if you want the definitive version of these videos with no ads, you should consider becoming a member for just $1 a month. All the same videos, just 0 ads. Now, let's see what's changed. For the most part, their mechanics are staying more or less the same for each lord. The main adjustments are to Cal's quest to unite all the Empire lands under one banner. It's mostly tweaks to how much growth you gain when at the higher tiers of Imperial authority. This makes the early stages of the campaign quite difficult, especially if you fall behind on taking control of the Empire. However, once you cross that middle tier threshold, you can really get on a roll and use the bonuses to fuel your continued efforts. It makes the whole thing feel a lot more rewarding without making it impossible to come back from falling behind. All factions have also seen a large expansion to the tech tree with the addition of deities. These come in 2 parts, minor and major. Minor allows you to pick 2 minor deities to dedicate your faction to, and all this really means is picking from 2 sets of 4 buffs to apply to your faction. There's a surprising variety of effects within these options to upgrade both your armies and settlements, so it's well worth investing in. To unlock this section, you first need to build a common temple in one of your settlements, so it can be worth prioritizing one fairly early to make the most of these bonuses. The major deities are either Sigmar or Ulrich. Again, to unlock these options, you first need to build either the Grand Temple of Sigmar or the Grand Altar of Ulrich in a settlement. These are tier 5, so it is quite a mid to late game mechanic. Once built, you'll be able to pick which you'd like to dedicate your faction to, locking out the other. Once dedicated, you can make use of the text below for a range of army abilities. Sigmar grants a lot of defensive buffs and use of a regiment of renowned flagellants unit. His army abilities are focused on defense and debuffing enemies. Ulrich brings a lot of bonuses to recruitment and attacking, as well as use of a regiment of renowned swordsman unit. His army abilities focus on dealing and increasing the damage of your troops. As I said, most of this is quite late game, both in terms of how much time it will take, alongside the monumental gold cost of everything. Don't feel the need to rush to the main deities, as they will require a lot of investment and act more as a reward for making it to the late game than something you need to use to get you there. Minor deities, however, are well worth investing in even early on with the extreme cost, as they pay for themselves many times over as the turns go on. Alongside the religious buildings, there's also a new military support building called the Training Grounds. It provides a small amount of garrison units alongside XP for all local units per turn. This makes it great for placing in your recruitment provinces to get your armies trained up whilst they're waiting. Speaking of military, unit caps are introduced so you can no longer recruit infinite amounts of elite units, such as great swords, ironsides, and more. This is tied to recruitment buildings, but in short, it made army building a lot more thoughtful, rather than spamming the same best units in the faction over and over again. Lastly, all armies in the faction can make use of the Trenches stance. This sacrifices a small amount of movement range to grant all units increased ammo, missile strength, and resistance. As for changes to the individual factions, Cal keeps his mechanics the same and immunity to trespassing in the Empire, but drops everything else to gain an increase to Lord Recruit rank, alongside increased XP for all characters per faction he's allied with. This makes him great for uniting the Order Tide, as he will only become more powerful the more friends he has. Balthazar keeps everything from vanilla, but now gains a massive boost to his artillery power, with more range, rate of fire, and accuracy when at high ammo. This makes his armies truly devastating when the battles first start, so artillery spam is the way to go. Volkmar is getting perhaps the most changes, dropping everything but his books and reducing his cooldown reduction. In return, he gains access to units from the army of Sigmar earlier, alongside a new mechanic called the Cult of Sigmar. This is a new menu where he can spend gold to summon extra units in battle, alongside powerful items and followers. He can also spend a new currency called Veneration of Sigmar for powerful temporary buffs to his faction, and Veneration is gained via battles and sealing away Books of Nagash. His army also sees significant changes, expanding his bonuses to Sigmarite units, alongside bringing some added replenishment to keep them and Flagellants fighting fit. This new mechanic gives Volkmar something to do aside from chasing books around the map, so is a great addition. And lastly, Elspeth is getting a small tweak to her army, granting all units increased XP gain when battling any form of undead. Works for the lore, and works for who she ends up fighting in most of her campaigns, so a win there. Moving over to the roster, and whilst most units have seen some changes, the vast majority are very minor, such as new names, effects, or slightly changed stats. As such, I'll only be covering the actual new units added with the mod, and cope with saying I'm leaving something for you to discover for yourself by playing the mod, or reading the very comprehensive mod summary linked on the mod page. So first of all, they're getting a new generic lord called the Grand Masters. These are powerful lords almost exclusively focused on charging and making use of their various mounts. Unmounted, they're strong frontlines battlers with high armor piercing damage and good defenses. They can lead their armies very well from the front against pretty much anything, but of course you want to get them mounted to get the most out of them. As for their mounts, they have quite a range: the Barded Warhorse, the Knights of the Blazing Sun, Knights Panther, Reiksguard, Knights of the White Wolf, and the Knights of Moor. Getting a couple of new melee infantry units. First up, the Wolfkin. These are similar to Flagellants but gain a little more defense and HP whilst dropping most defensive stats. They do, however, inflict bleed, so whilst they may not do as much damage immediately over the course of a battle, it can certainly add up. Overall, they're very similar and can be used mostly the same as an unbreakable meat shield that does some decent damage but won't last very long against anything that hits back. We also have the Sigmarite Disciples. They're a little weaker than greatswords with less attack, weapon strength and half their armor. However, their real power lies in their support ability, granting nearby allies increased physical resistance and immunity to psychology. They work well spread throughout your front lines, offering okay damage and buffing their allies. They may not carry, but against the right enemy type, they can give you a significant edge. We also have a new cav unit, the Knights Panther. These act as a good halfway between Empire Knights and Knights of the Black Rose. They're more of a sustained combat cav with strong melee stats and non-armor piercing damage. That said, they still have a lot of charging ability with their high bonus, so it doesn't hurt to keep them on the move, especially if you have the time or micromanaging ability. Lastly, they're especially powerful versus casters with spell resistance and the ability to disrupt casts when they attack in melee. There are also some new units added that are exclusive to certain landmarks spread across the Empire. The Altdorf Company of Honor are a halberds unit and are of course only available in Altdorf. These are heavily armoured halberds with great armour and very high defence. They're a little slower but deal improved damage, making them the definitive line holder for the Empire. As if all of that wasn't enough, they also negate a significant portion of enemy charging ability and bolster the defense and leadership of allies the lower their HP gets. The Karabberg Greatswords are obviously a greatswords unit and obviously are only available in Karabberg. They're a stronger greatswords unit with stat improvements across the board. They also gain massive attack bonuses when in losing combat, so it doesn't hurt to send them in even if the odds aren't entirely stacked in their favour. The Knights of the White Wolf are only available in Middenland. Fittingly, they're kind of the opposite to the Knights of the Black Rose. They drop the high defense for more attack and damage, making them a little riskier but much more deadly. Their charge still isn't super high, so if you really want to maximize their output, you'll have to accept taking some hits for your trouble. When you factor in their frenzy, they'll deal heaps of damage in seconds, so it can be worth it as long as you keep an eye on them. And lastly, the Elect Count state troops in Karl's campaign have changed to make them a little bit more unique. First up, we have the Teutogen Guard, and it says great swords, but really, they're more like Sigmarite Disciples. Compared to the Disciples, they come with stat improvements to everything but speed and defense, which gets a small decrease. However, this results in them being quite a deadly force in melee and still fairly tanky with their high armor. Their passive increases both the damage and charge resistance of nearby allies, making them great when placed in the middle of your front lines. The Imperial Foot are a Foot Reiksguard unit, whatever that means since those units aren't in this mod. Compared to the Swordsmen, they gain improvements to everything but speed, and this makes them a very powerful melee unit with excellent defense and damage, albeit not armor piercing. If you're not against armor, they will carry your battles no problem. If you are, well, at least they can hold the line for a very good long while. Lastly, whenever they're in losing combats, they boost the leadership and defense of allies to hold the line just a little longer. Eldred's Guard are a shielded spearman unit and gain improvements to armor and melee stats, making them a very tanky early game infantry unit. They also improve the toughness of all nearby allies, so work great as a support unit as well as a line holder. The Bordermen are handgunners and they drop some unit size alongside a good chunk of range and ammo to gain explosive missiles. This makes them into a very powerful damage dealer with a lot of risk but even more reward. Gunderman Surefires are handgunners and drop even more unit size to instead gain range and missile strength. This makes them very long range snipers, though their accuracy at the max of their range may be a little bit questionable. They can increase that range even further if they remain still and dig in, and their missiles slow and reduce the defenses of their targets. Nordland Mariners are Free Company Militia, and they gain some huge stat bonuses across the board, making them much more effective at both melee and ranged at the cost of a small amount of speed and range. They're now a very short range unit that can deal excellent armor piercing damage and do a halfway decent job at defending themselves in melee. I'd still stick to ranged as much as possible as the melee damage is still lacking, but at least they won't die as instantly. The Stir River Patrol are crossbows with Vanguard deployment, flaming and flammable missiles. Knights of the Everlasting Light are an Empire Knights unit and gain some slight stat improvements, making them much more powerful at charging. They also reduce the attack of nearby enemies, so despite their low defense, they can avoid damage pretty well in melee. The Knights of Moor are another Empire Knights unit and gain improvements to armor and attack, but reduce defense and charge bonus. This makes them a little weaker at all forms of damage and more vulnerable to armor piercing damage. However, if they are winning their melee combat, they increase their own attack and cause terror, allowing them to break units in no time if the targeting is right. The Stubborn Bulls are Greatsword Empire Knights, and they gain more armor, attack, and non-armor piercing damage whilst dropping their defense and charge. They're a strong sustained combat cav that trades well into low armor with their anti-infantry bonus. Whilst healthy, they gain extremely high leadership and some resistance to keep them fighting fit. Wissenberg's Welcomers are grenade war wagons. They drop some range and missile strength from the regular war wagon in exchange for explosive missiles. Whilst the listed damage may be lower, the potential for area damage hitting multiple entities at once means it tends to balance out and be about the same, if not a little bit better. They're also able to replenish the ammo of nearby allies, but not themselves. The Noble Sons are Pistoliers, and they gain armor, attack, and range alongside staggering missiles and vigor regeneration whenever they're out of melee. Obviously, avoid melee as much as possible and use the extra range and stagger to chip away whatever is giving you trouble on the front lines. And lastly, Sutsun's guns are a mortar unit, and it gains more range alongside flaming magical missiles and no friendly fire. Now to wrap up with some closing thoughts of the Empire in SFO. A trend I'm sure we'll see with all SFO factions is just how little it seems like has changed, but just how different the experience actually is. The actual mechanical changes don't seem like much written down, but my Karl Franz campaign, one I've played dozens of times in vanilla, went completely different than it ever has. The addition of soft penalties early on gives you extra incentive to take control of the Empire and means you really feel when you start to crest the hill and make progress. The deed system was always in my mind to work towards, as some of those bonuses can be super impactful and save a campaign that's on a downward trend. Speaking of difficulty, the unit capacities make the game much more challenging, as you can no longer easily rely on stacks of elite units to stomp your enemies. I was really thinking about what to put in my armies and where to spend my elite troops so that everyone could succeed. Battles were also much slower and more challenging. Melee lasts a lot longer, meaning there's more time for flanks or getting strong angles with ranged troops. Not only was manual battling more necessary, it was also more difficult and rewarding, with each victory feeling earned rather than given. I was also playing all of this on normal, so if you're a difficulty fiend, you'll be in for a real treat. The small tweaks to units and nice additions in the roster feel right at home. Nothing is overpowered, and the units that are locked behind capacities and late game buildings, so once you do get a hold of them, they don't really spoil the challenge. And lastly, the changes to the four lords who got them were very welcome, especially Volkmar's new mechanic, which really makes him feel complete. Overall, if you've played the Empire campaign hundreds of times over the years, and I know you have, it's well worth hopping onto SFO to check them out. Looking at the change list, it really doesn't seem all that different, but I guarantee you, once you get playing yourself, you'll start to notice all kinds of fun little details that really elevate the experience to something totally new. But what I want to know is, what faction do you want to see next in SFO? Let me know in the comments below, and enough people rally around the same one, I'll take a look at it next. Don't forget to like the video if you did, subscribe for more, and if you want more Warhammer 3 mod videos, then check out this one all about 11 new Chaos Dwarf Legendary Lords.